Hello everybody, it's Steve Evans here with Sonicstate, and I'm very pleased to say we have Francois Quereuil here today, who is, to give him his official title, and I hope I get this right, Francois, Vice President Audio Product Management at Avid. Have I got that right?
You got that right, Steve. Good to be here.
I got it right. Good. Off to a good start. Well, thanks for joining us today to talk about this really quite exciting announcement from Avid. I mean, we kind of knew it was coming. I had a great interview with Simon Sherbon earlier on in the year when we were doing the Carbon launch, which was so I was familiar with the concept of the hybrid engine then. But during that interview, Simon said, well, you know, one of the things we're quite excited about is that we are at some point going to roll this hybrid engine out for HDX users. And I thought at the time, okay, well, that sounds pretty significant to me. So that's what we're here to talk about today, because it's nearly here, right? Is it here? Is it here yet? What's happening?
It's here. We released the new software version on Thursday last week, so our customers have been able to update and take advantage of the new functionality. And so far, what I've seen, at least some of our users sharing online, it's been a really great experience. So I'm super pleased to see folks really taking their HDX rigs to a completely different level of performance. Very exciting.
So I could download that now, and then once I've installed that software, there's the hybrid engine isn't the only thing to talk about in this update, but I think we'll start with that, because I think that's probably the most significant thing and the thing that most people are interested in at the moment. What I'm going to see is a checkbox somewhere when I select which audio engine I'm going to use for my Pro Tools sessions, along with my HDX option. There's going to be a checkbox there that says hybrid engine, right? So if I'm using my HDX playback engine, I've got the option of enabling the hybrid part of that or not. Is that right?
That's correct. So you have a choice from 2021.6 of enabling either HDX hybrid, which leverages the hybrid engine, or to continue using HDX classic, which some customers might choose to do for some reasons, because they have completely deterministic performance and only need a certain number of voices. So we left that in there so that folks can always revert back to that if they need to.
I guess so as well, and also, you know, as there are always with when we have systems with 20 million different plugins in our plugin folders from 10 million different manufacturers, you know, we all know that there are little discrepancies sometimes with how plugin latencies and things are reported, and it is great sometimes just to be able to go back to exactly where you were, because we've all sometimes opened sessions up and something's not quite right somewhere. So it's good to be able to still have that option. So when we click the hybrid engine, then all of a sudden, the way I understand it, we have the native power of the computer is at our disposal and at Pro Tools' disposal. We can have a talk in a minute about what the various tasks are and how they can be assigned to the different processors we have, the native processor and the DSP, the HDX processors. One thing that I wanted to talk to you about on the way to that was, once upon a time in Pro Tools, you used to be able to say how much or how many processors the computer you were working on, if you were working native, or I think even actually working with TDM, how many CPU cores you could allocate to Pro Tools. And you used to be able to kind of ring fence a certain amount of the computer's performance for Pro Tools, or save a little bit for something else that was running. Now that disappeared, didn't it? So did that disappear with the arrival of HDX 10 years ago, roughly?
So, you know, it's a good question, and I actually wasn't at the company at the time, so I can't give you a very specific time frame. I think what it has to do with is just generally modern computing and using multi-core CPUs has become so intelligent that we both, can leverage little bits of each processor anyway. But the OS also dictates a lot of things. So there's certain capabilities that we don't have anymore. The OS will make decision as to what a particular thread and where it's running on which core. So right now we take the approach of using that in the most efficient way possible. Which, by the way, in this release, there's a number of really deep sort of engine optimizations that allow us to take very good, efficient use of the available cores, and it gets into deep in the weeds of using real-time threads on the OS. I won't get into that because I'm not an engineer, but know that it's there.
Am I right in thinking that that some of that control about how the CPU allocation is come back with this release? We'll maybe just delve into that a bit later on. But one of the reasons why I'm conscious of it is, for example, if you're running maybe the Dolby Atmos production suite, or if you're running the Dolby Audio Bridge and you're running the renderer and you're running in the box, obviously you've got two very CPU hungry beasts on your computer competing for processing, and it seems to me that it'd be really handy sometimes to kind of be able to manage that a little bit. But maybe we should talk about how the various Pro Tools tasks are distributed around the various processors. Probably it's best to start with the way voices are used.
Yeah. So if you're in the HDX world before last Thursday, you were completely constrained for your mixing configuration. You were completely constrained to the hardware, and that was one of the things that was part of the inherent design of HDX, because what we wanted to do was to have a perfectly deterministic system so that you'd have guaranteed performance with your voices and your mixing configurations. So everything was tied to the hardware. So on each HDX card, you got a custom designed FPGA, and you've got 18 DSP chips. In the previous HDX world, you basically had a certain number you were limited to a certain number of voices for each card, because it was basically by design in the hardware. And when HDX came out, it was plenty of voices, plenty of DSP for processing. You could still use native processing as well, by the way. So you could put DSP plugins and native plugins on the same track in old HDX. Now, what that creates is massive amounts of latency, because you're having most of your processes are on the card, and then you need to go back to the computer, talk to a non-DSP plugin, then come back to the card. And if you create a lot of complexity in the routing, it eats up your voices and limits the capabilities of the system. So as we were having, obviously today a lot of folks are building super complex mixing templates, especially you mentioned Atmos, and that's really one of the crux of why we did this as well, is folks were running into the limits of an HDX3. So they were building huge mixing configurations with tons of buses, really, really big sessions, and would run out of voices. So there wouldn't even be any space left to use DSP plugins. And so the post community especially was like, hey guys, can you do something about this? Like, can we just run natively? Now the computers are super fast. Can we just run natively and use the HDX card to pass inputs and outputs? And that basically gave us the idea: what if we could do both in a really streamlined and really easy way? And that's where the hybrid engine comes in. So what it does, it basically takes the mixing engine of Pro Tools and puts it back in the native domain. So when you're using hybrid engine, your mixer configuration, all of your routing, your busing, your voices are essentially running on your computer. And that's why we were able to significantly increase the voice count. So we put it now at 2048, which is, by the way, for everybody that has Ultimate. So it's not just HDX users, it's anybody using HD Native or using Pro Tools Ultimate standalone with any other hardware. So now that we're able to
2048 voices.
Correct, for everybody running Pro Tools Ultimate. So now that we are able to run your mixing configuration completely natively, your cards do a little bit less of the heavy lifting, which makes them completely available to target the DSP processing when you really need it. And specifically, you really need it when you want a completely low latency tracking experience. And that's where the hybrid engine shines. You massive session, and decide at the very end you're like in the final stages of your mix stage of your mixing process. You got this massive session running. Typically, you wouldn't be able to do some tracking at that point because your buffers are running super high, and there would be massive amounts of latency. With a hybrid engine, you just select a track or a set of tracks, and you turn them into DSP mode. And what DSP mode is just takes that particular audio path and moves it entirely to the DSP. So at that point, most of your sessions running on your computer, but then whatever live inputs you have that you're tracking are running in the low latency domain, even with DSP plugins. So you're getting sort of this best of both worlds, which is something we introduced with Carbon, which is really compelling with Carbon. But Carbon is also a much smaller system. It only has 8 DSPs. It doesn't have that much I/O. It's very constrained. So the problem was not a hard one to solve from a software development standpoint. And that's why we needed a little bit more time to get it to HDX, because if you think about all of the I/O and card permutations that you can possibly create with HDX, it was a bit of a more complex problem. But now it's out there, and it's really changing the capabilities of the system. Like from radically, people are seeing massive performance improvements because they can run a ton of their process on the computer, and now they have a lot more DSP to play with to track at low latency, but also to supplement their mixing if they need to.
Yes, it was a very elegant solution with the Carbon, where you could not only put a single channel into DSP mode, but very sensibly, any channels downstream from that, so buses and masters associated with the channel that you're using, would also switch over to DSP, which kind of saves you having to think about it and do it yourself. And that's very practical. And in that instance, if you're using plugins that have both a native and a DSP version, then you're not going to notice anything, because I know that the plugins will just switch between being DSP and native. The architecture is identical, so there'll be no change in sound there. If you're running native plugins that don't have a DSP equivalent, then they will be will they be bypassed, or will they be disabled? Is there anything to talk about there? Or they're just bypassed, aren't they?
They're bypassed by default if they don't exist. Now, one thing that is quite elegant that we created as well with the hybrid engine is the idea of a DSP mode safe for a track. So specifically for time-based effects like delays and reverbs, a performer's perception of latency, if they're going through a reverb, is just not. It doesn't impact the performance. You want a little bit of reverb, or you want a little bit of delay to have sort of that confidence when you're tracking vocals, for example. So what we did is we enabled the ability to actually feed a native auxiliary with a DSP track. So let's say I'm a singer and I'm going through Autotune. There's now a DSP version of Autotune and some sort of channel strip plugin that's DSP. Now that experience is real time. There's no perceivable latency, but I can actually feed an auxiliary with really beautiful native reverb. And that obviously has some latency attached to it. With the pre-delays of a reverb, you don't really perceive it. So we're letting users sort of have that as well, which is a great workflow trick as well. Because some users came back to us with the hybrid engine and they're like, oh my God, I can't put DSP, I can't mix and match on a single track. And that's true. That's the one trade-off, is if you want the DSP mode experience, it is moved to the hardware. So being if we were putting native plugins on, allowing native plugins on that, you'd create an insane amount of latency because of the back and forth again with the native process. So you basically make a choice, but then if you want to feed an auxiliary that has native plugins, you can do that. So that gives you that flexibility. It requires a slight little bit of mind shift, and maybe some people may need to kind of sort of modify their templates. But overall, the benefit is so significant that I think it's a worthwhile trade-off.
Yeah, okay, I understand. So you've got you can put your whole channel into DSP mode. You've got that DSP mode can automatically cascade downwards if you want it to. There's preferences for it to allow that to happen or not. I understand. I think I don't think that doesn't necessarily happen automatically, does it? Or is that record?
No, the cascading is automatic by design, because in order to, the assumption is that when you put tracks in DSP mode, your intent is to keep as low latency a path as possible, and therefore everything that's downstream is being turned into DSP mode. So it's auxes and masters, those kind of things. But if you want to mix and match, you can just basically command click we have like sort of a lightning bolt icon that enables the DSP mode on the Pro Tools UI, and you can command click that, and it turns it into a DSP mode safe and allows the native processes on that particular strip.
It's
very very elegant.
Yeah, that's great, and that's I mean that's also the obvious benefit from that, as you say, is having the near zero latency tracking experience, which is unbeatable, really. And there even with very low latency, I still hate to hear that slight double that's there. And when I was using the Carbon, it was great just to have no latency at all, and it does make everything so much more solid in the headphones, and all the players are so much happier. Some people are so, understandably, if they lose confidence in the fact that what they record it comes back, ahead or behind the beat slightly because of something that's out of their hands, that's just a messy creative situation in the studio, and it is hard sometimes when you have to be invisibly shifting regions back and forth sometimes after things have been recorded to allow for these problems. So I think we're all used to having to kind of execute various workarounds under different circumstances.
Well, I think you touched on something that's really fundamental, and even now, like after all these years of performers getting used to latency in some way, shape, or form, folks who haven't really experienced sort of an HDX or Carbon tracking experience are kind of, it blows their mind. Like if they've been used to working with latency, they're like, oh my God, like this is so much better, and I was able to give a much better performance. So that, at the end, it's the goal here, and I think we've really delivered in that respect.
Yeah, it is great. One of the things that I'm sure I'm not the only person that has a hybrid workflow, in that I mix in the box to a certain extent, but then I kind of stem my mix out to hardware or to my mixer, and I have analog stuff over my mix bus, and I take stuff out of the session and I bring stuff back into the session on auxiliaries, and then I put mastering type plugins on those auxiliaries, and then they feed a master bus. So by the time I'm listening to my mix, I could well be 14,000 samples latent, and there's still no workaround for that. I mean, even if I basically have to create a track that's routed essentially to my loudspeakers, at which point I can record at zero latency, but then I've got to go to my session settings and offset all those regions back by the amount of latency in the session, right?
Right. Well, one thing you can do though, if you want to use external outboard for even for processing with a new session. You can actually turn the tracks in DSP mode, the ones that are routed to the external world. You don't have to put plugins on those, and they can be super low latency paths going in and out of your outboard gear. Yeah,
it is going to have an impact on that, I think, isn't it? Okay, so on mixing on individual channels, if you want to kind of bounce between DSP plugins and native plugins, you've still effectively got that round tripping happening. You've still got to be a little bit mindful of that, or does that perform better under the hybrid engine as well?
If you can't put native plugins and DSP plugins, they can't be active at the same time on the DSP track. So you on the track, you actually have to make a choice between native and DSP.
Oh, now, I see. So if I've got a DSP track, I can't actually put if I've got a native track, I can't actually put a DSP plugin on there, right?
Well, the good news is that all of the DSP plugins for Pro Tools are also exist natively. So you can totally do that. You can put them there, but you can't have on a given track, you can't have a native and a DSP process at the same time. What you have to do if you want to do things like that, like let's say you have a virtual instrument and you would want to get it through a DSP plugin, that you can't put it on that same track because the virtual instrument would get deactivated. But you can do some routing, and that would work. But again, that creates some round tripping and some latency that I don't think is necessary.
So we just have to put some native reverbs and things like that. We just have to have them on a send, make that send DSP safe, and that's the workaround in that instance.
Correct.
I have thank you.
That's the way to do it.
I've understood that now. Okay, that's great. So 2048 voices. So that's I'm used to seeing. I've got an HDX one rig. And I'm used to being stuck at 256 voices with that. I think I was up to 384 with Carbon when that came along. 2048 is a hell of a leap. So that's tracks and tracks and tracks and tracks, isn't it? I mean that's enough. That's enough, surely. That's enough tracks for anybody. 2048.
Yeah, and we picked 2048 for a reason. So there's a lot of other applications that just basically tell you've got unlimited tracks, and there's really no such thing as an unlimited track count, because at some point you will run into the limitations of your computer. So what we did, and the Pro Tools engine functions, it is way more optimized if you give it a limit. So we decided to put a very big limit, which will serve the needs of we think all workflows at 2048. Pro Tools is not trying to pretend it has unlimited voices, which would cause performance issues. So this way we know that we have guaranteed performance at 2048, and that we can serve our users' workflows effectively. Okay.
So in the if I'm working then with the HDX hybrid engine, and I've got my my HDX card there. Does my HDX card, does that remain the only way for me to get my signals physically into the outside world? Can I aggregate any other types of native interface into the session as well to add to my outputs?
No, when you're in the HDX world, you're stuck with the HDX I/O.
Okay, and the HDX I/O is still presumably 64 physical outputs per card.
Yes, that's correct. 64 physical I/O per card, correct.
If I was working in Pro Tools Native, do you know, is there a limit to the amount of physical outputs I can build into a session if I'm working natively? If I stacked up a load of RME UFX plus interfaces or something like that, could I have 200 outputs if I wanted?
No, you can't. There's a limitation there, but the good news is that with this release, we've actually increased that limitation. So Pro Tools and Pro Tools Ultimate were traditionally capped at 32 channels of physical inputs and outputs if you're using them natively. But we've increased that limit on both Pro Tools and Pro Tools Ultimate to 64. So now which is making a lot of folks that are using, as you said, RME, Focusrite, or Universal Audio interfaces pretty happy, because now they can actually use more physical inputs and outputs with their system as of that last version.
That's great. So that's part of that's not necessarily to do with the hybrid engine. That's just another benefit from this. And that's for people who are just working in Pro Tools Vanilla and Pro Tools Ultimate as well. Can have 64 hard outputs. That's great. That opens up a lot of possibilities for Dante as well, doesn't it? And all sorts of stuff. That's really good news. Okay, I think I can understand why people are going to be happy about that. Okay, so that's pretty good. So I wonder whether this might resolve. I've personally had a few issues in the past. Every now and again, I get several people have kind of experienced this. They random CPU spikes. You're watching your system usage meter, and you're hovering around kind of 2% on each thread, with a little bulge in the middle, and then all of a sudden, for no apparent reason, your CPU usage goes up to 100% red, and your session stops, and you get one of 7 or 8 different types of error message. And I don't know if we've ever got to the bottom of what causes that. And we've been told maybe to disable the Wi-Fi. There's the CSR util fix, the spin dump fix, and all these kind of things. What's the thinking at Avid about this? Is this something that's kind of just happens to so few people it's kind of ignored, or have you looked at it? Have you anything that you could say about if anyone's still experiencing these kind of problems? I still get them from time to time.
Yeah. So I mean, the fundamental problems with DAWs is that we all have to run on consumer grade operating systems. So we're trying to do more and more and more with the system. HDX was a good example of trying to be deterministic and sort of move some of the processing to sort of a dedicated hardware, but you still have to deal with the OS. And by the way the OSs manage their cores and their threads sometimes changes from one version of the OS to the next. So it's a constant race to check and tune the performance and provide our users with more information and more sort of capabilities to tune the performance. So one of the big things we're introducing with this version, which is probably the number one reason that Pro Tools crashes or Pro Tools gives you an error message, is often because a plugin has crashed. And it's really hard to identify. So many users are booting up Pro Tools by disabling all the plugins, all that stuff. It's really hard by process of elimination to try and figure out who's the culprit, sort of who's it's
a horrible. We've all been there at some point. Yeah.
So we introduce a new functionality in this version. So if a plugin causes a crash, you'll actually get an error message that tells you which plugin misbehaved. So that's pretty awesome. And
that's pretty awesome,
by the way. Yes, and it's not to penalize plugin manufacturers. Quite the contrary. It's really to help everybody know that there is an issue, and we feed that back to the partners so they can improve their plugin. And for the user, you immediately have an ability to disable if you need to, because you know that a plugin has misbehaved. So I think that's a big deal for everybody, for us, for the user, and for the plugin guys. Yeah, big deal.
Yeah, I didn't know that, and that is a big deal. It's a good bit of finger pointing going on. It's not us.
Yes,
it's you.
Yes, and so it will also the information will be identified in the crash report. So if you do have a Pro Tools crash and you want to send the report back to Avid, we'll get that information. So that's one thing we've been working on for what you describe as errors. Now the other things that we've done on this is we have a way we have a way to limit the number of real-time threads on Intel Macs right now. Because if you
Right.
have a very high number of real-time threads, that can have a huge impact on performance and stability. So you have a little bit more control, and you can, I would say that folks will have to experiment. We're giving those options in the playback engine selection window now, so you can limit number of real-time threads or turn on Intel Turbo Boost and those kind of things to maximize your Pro Tools performance. But
I think
all of those come
that's
with
what I
some
was thinking about.
compromises. Yeah.
Yes, okay, that's what I was thinking about earlier on. Yeah, there's a bit of control come back, a little bit of because I remember those days of kind of trying to find a happy place with your particular setup, and which did work, and it was useful to be able to sometimes to do that. Okay, so that's I think that's going to be welcome. So a lot to tweak here.
Yes.
That the plugin reporting thing that's massive. I think that's really great. What other massive things have you not told anybody about that's in
Oh,
this
um,
software update?
so so there's a few things. So we've talked a lot about Pro Tools Ultimate and sort of the hybrid engine and the 2048 voices. We've also increased the number of tracks for Pro Tools standard. So it used to be limited to 128 tracks at 48K, 64 tracks at
Right.
96, and 32 tracks at 192. Now Pro
Yeah.
Tools standard supports 256 mono or stereo tracks at all sample rates. So you have a significant increase of track count there for Pro Tools standard. We've also, that's a
Okay.
big one, I think, for a lot of Pro Tools standard and Pro Tools Ultimate users that are not using HDX. We're enabling delay compensation for side chains. So now you have, it wasn't the case before if you didn't have HDX. So now if you have a lot of side chaining going on, delay compensation kind of looks at that, and you have a much better
So
sound when you're using that.
only HDX users had sidechain delay compensation up till now. Is that right?
Correct. Correct.
God, if I'd known that, I'd have been more caring about the non-HDX users, because that must have been a real pain not to have that. I didn't
Indeed.
know
And
that. Well,
again,
that's
it's not
thank
a,
God that's there. I mean,
yes. No, it's great,
yes,
and the feedback has been huge on that one because it doesn't sound
yeah,
like a
I'll
big
bet.
deal, but it really is. And this
Yeah,
has to do with our ability to, again, the HDX world is deterministic, so it's much easier for us to implement those kind of functionalities. So it wasn't actually not easy to do this and make sure that delay compensation is accurate on sidechains. So now that we have it for non-HDX system, it's pretty awesome, and lots of good
I've
feedback
run
on that
into.
particular feature.
Yeah, that's yeah. I mean, I suppose a lot of people would say, well, I should think so too, But I mean, that the fact that it's there is great. I mean, there are a lot of good things I think coming with this kind of software update. Really, that's just kind of just another number, but actually, it's kind of it's a bit of a landmark change in the world of Pro Tools. Really, I mean, it's up until this point, I think people with HDX systems were kind of going, well, I've had this for 10 years now, and I've got these crappy old chips that are really old in this HDX card. They're going to bring out something new soon, and I'm going to have to get rid of this. But actually, I mean, it does look like the system performances really do skyrocket with the hybrid engine, and it's kind of breathed a bit of new life into the HDX cards, and I dare say it might even people are going to maybe want to increase the HDX card count as a result of
I
this.
mean, that would obviously be, from a business standpoint, I would love that. So, yes, buy more
Yeah,
card, please. But I think
have the
more
prices
important,
gone up?
no,
Have
no,
the prices gone up on the
we haven't,
HDX cards?
no, we haven't touched the price of that. The thing I'd say is, beyond the idea that you can build really, really powerful systems with multiple cards, it also gives folks like yourself with an HDX One system with a massive amount of power. Now massive track count, and you get your DSP is being used sort of whenever you want to. So that flexibility gives you a ton more power for HDX1. So I would say that it's bringing sort of the cost of entry to HDX to a much lower price point, because you can really do crazy things with an HDX1, and that's very exciting to me. And it's also very exciting to see the number of DSP plugins that are available out there, because I think there's a misconception, and I think we found that with Carbon. Like, people were asking the plugin question a lot, and they're like, "Oh, but you don't have the plugins," and I'm like, "Are you just?" There's more than 300 DSP plugins for HDX or Carbon available today, and they're from some of the best companies in the industry. You know, Mac DSP, Sonox, Plugin Alliance. Plugin Alliance has, I think, to this day, 85 DSP plugins, including all of their channel strip emulations of SSLs, Neves. They have a new AMEC, Rupert Neve designed AMEC channel strip that just came out and sound fantastic. So the plugins are there, and they're also, if you look at these companies, they're also very, very affordable and sound amazing.
How come Waves have never got on board with the DSP thing?
You'll have to ask Waves.
I mean, that's just crazy, isn't it, really?
Well, I mean, I guess Waves also has their sort of accelerated system. They have SoundGrid, which they've probably focused on rather than doing the DSP thing. DSPs, even though there's a few DSP systems out there in the industry, and they're all very successful, and everybody is still using similar types of DSPs. And the reason is that in the world of audio, these DSP chips serve a purpose that hasn't been replicated yet. So if you want this super low latency dedicated processing, there's really no better way of doing it today. And there's a lot of research on how to get to the next step, but DSPs are still doing their job like amazingly well. For things that are relatively simple, I'd say. Emulating a compressor, an EQ, doing great channel strips, doing even some guitar amp emulation, those kind of things. Where the DSPs are struggling is when it comes to delay-based effects and really complex reverbs. That's where you can't really use the DSPs, because none of them have enough memory. And if you want to do a beautiful reverb, you need a ton of memory to create those, convolution, long tail type things. So that's where you still need to use the native processing. But apart from that, DSP is still extremely relevant because it does the job we need it to do really, really well.
So there's no plans for a new DSP system to come in the near future. You're just kind of just getting behind HDX for its next phase of its life. It seems. I guess that's how you're playing it at the moment.
There's always a plan, but I think getting to the next level, it creates really novel kind of problems in terms of engineering and development. And there's a lot of cool stuff I want to say in the future. But in the near future, yes, the idea was, let's focus on HDX. We have a ton of HDX users out there, and I think this hybrid engine capability is going to attract new users to come, or even native users that kind of see the benefit of the hybrid engine and want to step up to HDX. And yes, we're gonna keep HDX alive for a bit longer now that we figured this out. And
yes,
I have to say, I'll venture one comment about this is with the hybrid engine and the capabilities of HDX. There's literally no accelerated system on the planet that matches the capabilities.
Well, that makes sense in a way. I mean, I love for example, when we looked at the Carbon and the Carbon unit itself as a piece of hardware. Obviously, at the same time, we were looking at the UA the X8P, that type of thing, and a fantastic machine. But the problem is once the plugin's running on that DSP, it's running on that DSP, and it's always on that DSP. The lovely thing about switching between the native and DSP with the Hybrid Engine HDX is that you can do that tracking in low latency and then free up your DSP and move on. And that's one of the big differences, I think, and that's what sets this system apart from what I see.
I couldn't agree more. It's interesting that it's actually a hard value proposition to explain, because folks in the industry have been associating certain plugins with the DSP. So it's like, yeah, if I want to run this plugin, I have to have the DSP. Which, by the way, I'm one of those people. I have a UA satellite in the back of my system, and I love using some of their stuff. So I totally get it.
Yeah.
But explaining that we have a completely hybrid solution with all of our DSP plugins really, literally, almost instantly switch to native on the same track if you press a button, with phase cancellation type accuracy, because they're exactly the same process, is a huge benefit, I think, because you can create a massive session, work with your DSP, etc., but you can take it on the road and just listen to it on your laptop, and it will be exactly the same processing running. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's you can't argue with that. So a couple of other things then. I love the fact that Dolby Atmos workflow is embedded in Pro Tools Ultimate. Are we still topping out at a 712 bed in Pro Tools with Dolby Atmos? Is that still the widest path available?
That's correct, but that's something that we're working on for future releases to allow actually more types of tracks and potentially make them customizable. So that's future development. But for now, yes, it's still.
People must be screaming for a 714 bed, right? They must be. It's such a pain in the arse to work around this 712.
Correct, and we're on it. We're on it.
Great. Okay, that's great. I mean, and also I think that I think I have asked you this already, but you can't make an aggregate audio device that uses the Dolby Audio Bridge as part of it, can you? Which is a terrible shame in some ways, because if you are doing a Dolby Atmos mix, and it means you can't use a hardware insert, or there's a lot of things that you can't do. It would be great to do,
yes.
But is that something that is an Avid responsibility, or is that a Dolby responsibility, the Dolby Audio Bridges, or is it something you've worked on together?
It's something we've worked on together. It is actually their responsibility. One of the things we've done recently is to allow enough individual streams to go to the through the Dolby Audio Bridge to the production suite, because that's using core audio, and there was a limitation there. So we've taken that limitation out for that particular workflow to make it better. But just to address your commentary on at a higher level, improving the Dolby Atmos workflow and its integration inside of Pro Tools is one of our top priorities, because we were the first ones to integrate Dolby capabilities in a DAW. We have a really established footprint. Like, folks are the Atmos workflows around the world are predominantly Pro Tools based, but we also see that a lot of competition, a lot of other DAWs have done some pretty cool things when it comes to integrating the Atmos workflows better. So we're on it, and we'll deliver the best possible workflow. But it's all of these things are a lot of work, and Pro Tools is one of those. We it's both a blessing and a curse, because we serve an audience that is so incredibly diverse. Think about from bedroom to Skywalker studio, from post-production, ADR, music. So we have to cater to all of these different audiences and bring them something. So I think this release is actually a good example of us trying to address a lot of things that people have been asking for, across the spectrum. But you'll see more of catering to all these audiences going forward. There's a lot of cool stuff in our plans.
What else is there in this? There are some other really useful things. Just for example, the fact that if you were import a video and do some work on it, and then you want to bounce it back out in QuickTime, am I right in thinking that you can bounce it back out in exactly the same codec and format that it came in at? Is that right?
Correct. Like we've basically pretty much finished the whole bounce to QuickTime and import QuickTime formats into Pro Tools. That was a huge undertaking when Apple deprecated the QuickTime libraries, which, to be fair, we had a lot of heads up on. They gave everybody in the industry a lot of heads up that this was going away. But then with every new OS, they actually kept it going. So we were just hoping for the best, and then we're confronted with the amount of work we need to do. But now we're in a good place. We can do the same as source bounce. We can deal with H.265. We can export to AAC. We can import Apple lossless. So there's all of these things have been added back into Pro Tools.
Francois, thank you for your time this evening. That's all the questions I have for the time being, and all the things I was wondering about. Doubtless, as soon as we hang up tonight, I'll think of 20 more, and maybe I'll hit you up with some emails for some supplementals, But thanks for talking.
I can give you one more. I can give you one more if you have 1 minute.
Parting nuggets, number one.
Yes, parting nuggets. Here's one. So back in November, we introduced dark mode for Pro Tools.
Yes,
I think that was pretty welcome from a lot of our users. But a lot of users were, it was our first stab at it, and some people hated it, some people loved it, some people hated it, and some people had some very constructive feedback as to how to make it better. So we spend basically between November and now tweaking the dark mode so it's better right off the bat, and things are more visible, better contrast, all of these things. But we also now included a completely flexible color palette in Pro Tools where you can dynamically switch between classic mode and dark mode, so you don't have to reboot Pro Tools anymore. First of all, it's instantaneous with a click of a button. And then you have super granular control over colors, contrast, brightness of anything from the automation lanes to the grid to the track name to the folder tracks. So folks have a huge amount of customizing they can do for the Pro Tools UI, and it's kind of cool. It has nothing to do with audio, but it's kind of cool.
Yeah, that is kind of cool. That's another big one. And I don't know whether we've expressly said this yet, but if you're already on a subscription or if you're in an open subscription period with Pro Tools, this is free, right? It's free.
Completely.
You don't have to pay for this, okay? That's an important point to make. So if I go to my Avid account now, it'll be there. I can download it, right?
Correct.
Which I will do.
Yes, it's included in, if you're if you're eligible for the latest version of Pro Tools, then you get all this functionality.
Yeah.
There's no
the parachute thing,
anyway.
The parachute thing finishes as well, doesn't it? So if you come to the end of your subscription, you'll be left at this version. It's not going to be taken away from you, is it?
Well, that's only for Carbon. That's only for the parachute thing is only for Carbon at the moment.
What do we need to know about this then?
So if you're on a subscription, no problem. You keep the subscription going, and that's you always get your features. And if you want to stop paying your subscription, you just stop having access to Pro Tools, and you can restart at any point. So it's pretty flexible that way. If you're a perpetual license owner, if you want to continue having access to the updates and your support, there's a yearly update plan that exists. Which you want to stick with, because if you drop off that, you have a grace period, but then you won't be able to. You can keep your obviously your Pro Tools perpetual in perpetuity, but you don't have an easy way to get back to your plan. You have to switch to subscription. Now we're looking at our because subscription is massively successful. By the way, I know. in audio. A lot of people kind of complain about the idea of a subscription for the software. It has become subscription has become the preferred way for people to buy and use Pro Tools, like by a
Yeah.
long margin. So
Yeah.
for folks on perpetuals, we are looking at making getting back on track a lot more, a lot easier and a lot more affordable. So we have plans to roll something out next month that should be very appealing for folks who happen to have dropped off plan and are now looking at the hybrid engine and going, I really want that. So we want to make sure that it's easy and affordable for folks to get current. So stay
So
tuned because that's
you're
coming next
recommending
month.
that you're recommending people just stay with the update plan.
Yeah, I would because in this world you get OS changes like on a yearly basis with Apple, specifically if you're so obviously a Mac OS user. And now there's the new M1 Max, which by the way this release is compatible with M1 Max. Not HDX or HD native just yet because we still have work to do on the drivers to run on the new Macs, but that's coming really soon. If you want to continue having access to the compatibility updates, that's one of the big ones. And then we are on a fast track to a lot of. I think people are seeing with this release that we are really going to start packing a lot more value in every release, and you want to be on plan to continue to experience that because there's a lot coming over the next few months and years.
Okay, and so the M1 compatibility is going to be big. That doesn't mean to say that all your plugins will follow. You'll have to keep an eye on that yourself, right? That's your responsibility as a
Correct.
user, right?
Yeah, for the M1
Okay.
Max, it's a bit of a complicated story because right now we're compatible with the emulation mode with Rosetta, which actually works really, really well, by the way. So that's why we're able to claim compatibility now. We had some work to do, but it's working really well. Pro Tools Software, Pro Tools Ultimate, Native, and then Carbon are all now compatible. And as I mentioned, HDX and HD Native are coming soon, and we still have some work to do on the drivers. Now, the big undertaking is going to be natively supporting the Apple Silicon architecture. That's a lot more work, but beyond the work that we need to do, we also need to completely update our plugin SDK so that plugin vendors can actually port their Pro Tools plugins to Apple Silicon. So while some vendors have done it already and it runs in Rosetta, so runs nicely that way, the Silicon support is both work that needs to happen on our end to completely update our SDK, but also it's work that needs to happen on the plugin side. So I want to say that's horizon, that's a little further on the horizon to be fully, compatible natively with Apple Silicon. But we're on it, and we're working hard on it to deliver it as soon as we can.
Thank you, Francois. That's great. I'm really looking forward to downloading this and installing it and investigating it. I mean, just from what I've read, I can see everybody's loving it. So it's really great. As a Pro Tools user, I'm really excited about it. So thank you from me for that. And thanks for taking.
You're welcome.
Thank you for taking time, to talk to us tonight. And hopefully, you guys have got a little bit more information and background about the HDX and this software update. And it's there are things in here that benefit not just HDX users. There are increased voice counts, increased kind of streamlining for everybody. So there's a lot here to look at. So, Francois, thank you very much for your time, and I will speak to you again, hopefully, at some point to talk about some more cool stuff.
Yeah, I would love that, and thanks, Steve. That was great. Really enjoyed sharing all this with you.
Thanks. Bye for now.